Hi everyone. Today I want to tell you about a Japanese tabletop role-playing game called... Oh, what is that music? Do you recognize this music? Indeed, today I want to talk about a tabletop role-playing game based on Sword Art Online. If someone happens to not know what it is, then I congratulate you on the fact that you did not get brain damage from this wonderful series. In short, in the world of Sword Art Online, in 2022 full-dive virtual reality was invented. And the MMORPG called Sword Art Online was made. To get into virtual reality, players put on a virtual reality helmet, similar to what we have now, except it is all quantum physics bullshit, in short, a direct connection to the brain. Well, anyway, everyone who entered this MMORPG on the first day after release was trapped in it, and there is no way to get out of, otherwise the Nerve Gear virtual headset will burn your brains. And if you die in the game, it will also burn your brains. In short, mankind has not thought of anything better than to gather all the players and put them in the hospital where they will lay for 3 years to play this game. No plot holes at all here. The only way out of this virtual reality is to clear all 100 floors of Castle Aincrad. The original novel series and then the anime based on it follows our main character named Kirito, a black swordsman who has no friends. He has 2 swords on his back and also as edgy as Driss the Dark Elf guy, but instead of a panther, Kirito has a bunch of waifus who follow him. Anyway, the series was very popular and influential in Japan and overseas, but despite its popularity there was no official tabletop role-playing game based on Sword Art, as far as I know. Even though we have our favorite Far East amusement research gaming company, which will gladly take any fantasy franchise and make it into a shitty soulless hack, based on Aincrad or some other game of theirs. But somehow didn't work out, I guess. And so at the previous Comiket, a doujinshi game came out based on Sword Art Online. Doujinshi means that it is self-published work, or an indie if you will, that is released without the publisher's permission. But publishers in Japan generally don't care about fan releases. And Comiket is big semi-annual doujinshi convention. So, anyway, this is the Sword Art Online TRPG we'll be looking at today. In this game we will obviously play characters stuck in this very Sword Art Online virtual reality MMO game. There are actually a lot of different virtual MMO in the series. But in this game you play the very first one. It's a fantasy setting where everyone run around with swords, use all kinds of sword arts, fight bosses, die to some random gimmicks, that kind of thing. The series also had other MMOs, shooter game and high fantasy game with magic and flying. But this particular tabletop RPG is not about them. So, the first thing we do in the game is create a character. First we select a class. There are 3 classes. Attacker, those who strive to kill monsters faster. Buffer, those who weakens monsters and strengthens allies. And tank, those who block monster attacks and help defend their comrades. Classes differ from each other by starting stats, initiative, defense, and sword skills that they can select. Sword skills are special abilities that, for example, enhance your attack in some way or help block, defend, weaken enemies, strengthen allies, and so on. There are a total of 25 of them in the book. And after you play and get experience, you can also pick advanced skills. Then we're going to have to choose the characteristics. And these are not the usual characteristics, like strength, vitality, or intelligence, as is common in tabletop role-playing games. In this game, characteristics are probably the most unusual and interesting part of the game. Characteristics are, literally, what characterizes the character. There are only 3 characteristics and they are written in the form of a sentence or in the form of several phrases. Clear as mud, right? So let me give you an example from Asuna's character list. The first characteristic is called Special, which can be used only once per session. The second is called Active, which can be used once per game phase. And the third one is called Other. It can be used at any time. For example, the Asuna's special characteristic is roughly something like, I wasn't even interested in this game, I was invited to join it. After it became clear that this is a death game, I almost despaired, but I decided to give it a try. Her the active characteristic is, to survive in Sword Art Online, I learned how to use a rapier. I also love baths, and other characteristic is, I use a one-handed sword. In real life I study in prep school and do well in my studies. Also I'm a good cook and a classmate suggested me to open a restaurant. So you can say that these characteristics are like aspects from Fate RPG. Only they are very detailed. There are many tables in the book for creating characteristics. There is a formula for making up sentences for characteristics. For example, you are actually very good at what you have rolled on table number 1, but you hide it. Or for example, you have something from table number 3 and people around you know and respect you as what you rolled on table number 4. As you can see, a very different approach to character stats in this game. Obviously, something that you think you will use all the time in every scene, you write it in the other characteristic. Something that you may use once per game phase, you write in the active characteristic. On something crucial and outstanding about the character that you can show once per session, you write it in the special characteristic. After sorting out characteristics, you write down personal information about the character. Name, gender, appearance, and select what's called my favorite. This is some distinctive feature of the character, their trademark. It could be your favorite weapon, or your favorite person, or if you can't think of anything it could just be your favorite sword skill. And during the game it can give you a bonus to the check once per session. In addition, the game also has all sorts of items. Weapons, potions to restore health, and so on. But you will get all this already during the session. At the beginning of the game you do not have any special items. You just have everything that your character should have. If you don't want to create a character yourself, you can choose one of the pregents. These are of course characters from the original story. Now let's talk about how to actually play this game. The sessions here consist of 4 parts, or phases. The first is the introductory phase. This is where you first introduce the characters and stuff like that. Maybe you play a scene, maybe just do a short spotlight for each character. And the main thing is that you get a mission for the session, and you can also choose your own personal mission. If you complete the main mission, you get 5 experience points, and you can get 1 more for completing your personal mission. Next comes the story development phase. You have a certain limited number of scenes that you will play. The scenes are divided into 2 types. First type is called crew. In this type of scene you try to achieve some story goals. For example, if you have a mission is to defeat a level boss, then in a scene one of the characters might go check for traps near the boss room. Each scene should end with a check. You choose a characteristic that suits the situation and make a roll. As I understand, the scenes are outlined by the players themselves, however they wish them to be. So basically you can come up with any characteristic you want to use. Of course, if your characteristic is I like baths, and you need to explore goblin dungeons for traps, it may be difficult for you to think of a way to use this characteristic. Depending on the selected characteristic, you roll the number of 6-sided dice. If it is a special characteristic that can only be used once per session, you roll 10 dice. If it is an active characteristic, you roll 6 dice. If it is your third characteristic, you roll 4 dice. In addition, check may have an advantage or a disadvantage, which adds 1 die if you came up with some good idea, or removes 1 die if you came up with something not so good. And you also get disadvantages for appearing in a scene multiple times in a row. That is, if you appear in a scene for the first time, you are fine. If you appear in the next scene, you get a disadvantage. If you appear again in the next scene, you get 2 disadvantages. So it's a mechanic to pass the spotlight between characters. To succeed in the check and thus in the scene, you need to roll a certain number of successes. Successes are considered to be 5s and 6s rolled on a 6-sided die. If you have a dice pool of more than 10 dice, then you do not roll dice after 10th, but simply add them to the success score. That is, if you have 11 dice, you roll 10 of them, and in place of the last one you just give yourself a +1 to number of successes. Moreover, there is a mechanic called UPS. If you somehow played your characteristic well, you get the up. It's basically like inspiration in D&D 5. For example, you play Asuna, she's a good cook, and you find some rare monster, and that monster looks delicious, and she says, after we'll kill it, I'll cook it for you guys, and everyone says, wow Asuna, you are so cool. And so she gets an up. UPS can be used to add advantage to your roll, or to reroll dice, or to increase your defense when you get hit. Anyway, in the story development phase, this type of scene called cruise are this kind of generic adventure fantasy scenes. It's actually not really specified in the game who exactly has the narrative rights. In other words, can the player describe what's going on in the scene themselves, like in Shinobigami and other Saikoro fiction games? And the GM just sits there and nods his head. Or you have to play it like in D&D, where the GM describes what's going on around you, and the player declares an action, and the game master tells what happens next. I think it's closer to the first option, but I'm not sure. So, in the story development phase, there is also a second type of scene, which is called interaction. Here, accordingly, there is interaction between the characters. You roleplay with other player characters or NPCs, and end of the scene you either add each other as friends or form a group. Friends as an MMORPG friend list type of friends. After all, this world has all the functionality from MMORPGs. The game even has a special table with topics for interaction. To help you with what you will talk about in this scene if you can't come up with something yourself. So, after you have done that, you get one up. If you add each other as friends, or create a group, then during the battle you can do an action called switch. This is when you make an epic combo together to chop down the boss. By the way, if you have a fight scene during story development phase, you don't actually use the combat rules, but treat as a normal crew scene. And this is basically how scenes go during story development phase. There should be as many scenes in this phase as there are players in the game. But that's kind of short, so you can probably do twice as many scenes as there are players. And when you have finished all the scenes, then begins the final battle. When the fight begins, you don't need to roll up a battle map with square grid or anything like that. Although it says in the book that you can put miniatures on the table to be more clear who fights with whom. But in general, the battle itself takes place in the theater of mind, not on the battle map. The battle proceeds by rounds, and the procedure is as follows. First, determine the initiative. To do this, make a characteristic check and add initiative value to the number of successes. Next, the character who gets the initiative performs their combat actions. There are 4 types of actions. They are the main action, sub-action, free action, and reaction. The main action is an attack or sword skill, which you use instead of attacking. Sub-actions are generally all sorts of buffs. Free actions are minor actions such as talking, or some buffs too. And reaction is used when you are attacked, or when anyone other than you does an action you can react to it in one way or another. When you attack an enemy, you make a characteristic check. What characteristic to use depends on how you roleplay the attack. Usually it will not be a simple attack, but rather a sword skill, which will add advantage or some additional effects to your attack. Also, all sorts of bonuses from items are added to the attack, as well as bonus from my favorite and other sources. When you attack, you deal as much damage as you get successes on the attack check. Then you take that damage value and compare it to the target's defense. If you do more damage than the target's defense, the enemy loses 1 health bar. If you do twice as much damage as the target's defense, the enemy loses 2 health bars, and so on. Player characters have a total of 4 health bars by default. Well, you can think of it as having 4 health points. Health bar is how Sword Art showed the health of characters. They were placed one under another over character's head. In the anime, the health bars also reduced and recovered, but in this game you just completely lose a health bar or you don't anything at all. Bosses naturally have a lot of health bars. If a character loses a health bar, for every health bar lost they get 1 disadvantage. That is to say, game has a death spiral. Another feature of combat is what is called switch. If your characters have added each other as friends, you can make a combo attack. One character hits, then the second one jumps out from behind him and starts hitting, then the third one joins in, and so on. Switch is made according to the following procedure. All participating characters make an attack check. First you look at the results of the first and second characters' checks. If they roll 2 or more dice with the same result, not necessarily with successes, then you can make a switch. Then you look at the results of the second and third characters' checks. Again, if they roll 2 or more of the same result, then they can make a switch. But the first character can't make switch with the third character. So you only need to match with the next in line. The more characters make a switch, the more bonus damage you do. It's an interesting mechanic. If the player's character ran out of health bars during the battle, they can choose either to leave the battle scene, run away, lose consciousness, get trapped by the boss, for example. Or you can choose death, but in this case you will immediately get the opportunity to perform 1 more turn, and then ultimately die. All in all, these combat rules are not that complicated. But all the actions that can be performed in battle can be modified sword skills in some way. The game book states that the duration of the session is supposed to be 60 to 90 minutes, so it is fine to have combat rules more on the lighter side. Now let's talk about the master section of the book. There is nothing really there. There are a few monsters. Then it talks about how to deal with the bosses. Unlike player characters, bosses naturally have a lot more health bars. The minions can be grouped together, and accordingly their characteristics are stacked from that. There are any tools for the game master, but there are 3 scenarios. What can I say about the book itself? It is clearly made so that it can be cheaply printed and sold for 500 yen. There are only 45 pages, there are almost no pictures, layout is very compact and minimal. Well, and the game itself is written in such a way that it should not be your first tabletop RPG, otherwise you will probably not understand how to even play it. There are no lengthy explanations about what is a scene, how to play a character, and so on. Basically, if it was written like other Japanese TRPGs, you could sort of keep the same amount of content, but make it a 100+ pages book. But either way, it has all it need to have, so it's fine. Only thing that is not very clear is how to set scenes in terms of narrative rights. And so this is the Sword Art Online TRPG. Very light game that takes just an hour and a half of playtime. I actually thought it would be much worse. But it turned out to be basically alright. The characteristics thing is really interesting even. I might actually play it one day. By the way, a supplement book for the game came out a few months ago, but I don't have it, so I can't really comment here. And that's it. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, comment, like, tell your friends. See you next time, everyone.